Hello, welcome to Katz Lives Matters, Katz Compendium podcast number 2. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, once again, I have my friend Finamy here with me.
Who is exhausted, so please do not blame me if I sound like shit. And I'm less coherent than I normally am.
It's been quite a long day, that's for sure. However, today we were going to touch upon things like the caravan issue that is going on in the U.S. at the border. And we are also going to discuss something that I had been hearing about for a bit of time from a radio show host I listened to. But I wasn't quite sure about the validity of what he was saying because I hadn't really seen many other reports on it. However, I did a bit of digging here with Finamy into it. We were looking at Tucker Carlson interview and
which does not sound legitimate, but it was him interviewing a South Afrikaner who had written a book about some of the issues that was going on, and apparently he was the only one who was willing to listen, which seems to me ridiculous, but
the book was called Kill the Boer. If you're interested, we'll just get that done right off the bat. I haven't read it personally. Again, I just
didn't even know it existed.
No, I was just doing some research and I saw it. It looks very interesting, though, that's for sure. However, I think to start, we are going to discuss the caravan issue that is going on in the U.S., and it has obviously created a larger rift in society, and I can say, as a Canadian, it also has created a bit of a rift across the way here up north. There's definitely sentiments on both sides, like there is down in America.
There's a big division over what should be done.
And how people should be treated and what the right values...
How to react.
The right ideals and values, how to handle this situation. Which is, when situations of any sort of situation arises, it kind of comes down to what's going on now, which is the divide on how to deal with it. And right now it's the ideological divide on how to deal with it, from the Republican progressive side of letting them in, or the Republican Make America Great Again crowd who use language like this is an invasion. Personally, I don't know that I would categorize this as an invasion yet. The amount of people that have made it to Tijuana, I believe, was something like 3,000 to 3,500.
Maybe 4,000. It's expected to grow to 10,000
people. Though.
However, over 1,000 people have returned back to Honduras because it's not feasible. And and this is another thing that's important to consider is yes, it's very important to be looking at the bipartisan reactions in the states, but again, looking at these reactions in Tijuana,
which is where the Honduran migrants
have had to stay and are going to be staying for who knows?
God knows how long.
And
it is now there's a divide not only in the States but also in Tijuana. I'll say this: the divide that I'm seeing so far in Mexico is much more one-sided than it is in America. Absolutely, unequivocally. I don't think there's any question on that. And I don't know much about the Mexican culture. I really don't. I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to know a lot about it.
No, but what's important to note right here is that these people who are in Tijuana right now have no intention of becoming Mexican citizens. That's not their goal right now. Their goal is to become U.S. citizens. Their
goal is not to assimilate.
No. But I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is they want to join U.S. society. That's fine. They want to contribute to that society, whatever. If that's the goal, fine. Whatever. We're not discussing that in this instant. What I'm saying is that Tijuana residents don't want to front the footbill to have these people there for an extended period of time when they're not going to be contributing back to that society afterwards. They're just going to leave.
Well, and I saw a commercial, I believe it was a commercial that the Republicans had put out right before the midterms. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what it was. And it showed this individual who apparently was a convicted cop killer from South America. He came over. I don't know who let him stay. The ad said Democrats let him come and Democrats let him stay. Then, this is what was important. It cut to an interview with I don't know, I believe it was CNN, I'm not sure though. It's cut to a little interview with, some lady was translating one of the Honduran immigrant or migrants that were coming over. And he said that he wanted to apply for a pardon, and, it said for what, and it was for attempted murder. And so I think one of the biggest concerns on the right is the fact that getting proper information and proper background checks on these individuals often can be difficult because they often come, like, if you went somewhere and you were someone who got out of prison for a heinous crime, a rape, a killing, a horrid assault, you're not going to go, for the most part, and be honest, unless you're that 1 out of a million people that is trying to be honest. And that's not going to happen. Just realistically, that's not what's going to happen. And, however, I don't think language like saying it's an invasion at the moment when you have, 3,000 people. America has like 350 million people.
Yeah, it's not an invasion.
It's not at all. I mean, you look at the response that Trump was able to muster in almost an instant, where he basically snapped his fingers and had 5,000 army individuals down there. He has increased barbed wire. I don't even know how much, an extreme amount, and he's also put new blockades up. So the amount of protective measures he was able to implement were staggering in almost an instantaneously small amount of time. So to use language like it's an invasion is obviously nothing more than a tactic to try to whip things up. And I am a fan of Trump. I'm not going to say I'm not. But I don't think that type of language is necessary, because I don't think, personally, that this group of Honduran migrants has shown to be a force that is invading. It's not like they're armed.
No, they're civilians. And some of them might be criminals, but...
And we don't know how many, which is the problem. I'm acknowledging that.
Well, and again, it's not a request to just... I don't know. This is where it gets really difficult for me, because at the very basis, this is human lives. These are human lives, and they're children, and there are children there, even if it's not the majority of them being children and women. There are children present, and this is something that needs to be considered, is the timeline of Honduras. It's
quite the timeline. Let's just put it that way.
A coup is mentioned almost every it's so...
Coup is mentioned, I think it was 10 or 11 times.
It was more than that. It just wasn't pulling it up properly. There's coup there. It just ousted a coup.
An alleged bribe. Someone takes over. There's a coup 3 years later. And now, peace treaty. That's pretty good. For civilian. So, in more than a century, in 1981, more than a century until the first civilian government is leading. That's scary. Let's keep reading.
Well, the thing I just want to point out is, because everybody gets upset that U.S. does have a responsibility. And in
Western societies, the idea of R2P it exists.
And that's fine. But the U.S. went in there, and they took over the economy. Who knows how much of that was going back to the country and what was just being exported, because that was largely in U.S. control. They used it as a base to launch attacks on other nations. during times of civil unrest and gave no interest to helping the civilians. So it seems like a very interventionist behavior when it's going to benefit the states, which, I mean, when have they not done that, and when have countries not done that? But this is such a country of turmoil. There has literally never really been a period of peace.
Well, it's in 87, amnesty granted both to military and left-wing guerrillas for abuses committed during the early 1980s. I mean...
But then, like, right afterwards, it says that they're armed forces and right-wing death squads.
So obviously nothing was really dealt with.
No, and that's what I mean, is that, like, literally nothing...
88, Honduran government is guilty of disappearance of citizens between 81 and 84.
So it's just...
the leaders assassinated by left-wing guerrillas.
Okay, but stop here, because this is what becomes the problem, is the same problem that you run into with war-torn countries. When you say, well, why don't you just go home? And don't get me wrong, I am a very firm advocate of trying to stay and make your country better and trying to fix the problems that are there. But I also cannot speak to somebody who has a family, who
has to
is
deal
just
with this
so
kind of
tired.
Stuff. What if somebody has grown up, like was born in the 40s, now they'd be 70 something, and they've encountered all of this. I don't blame them for wanting to get out. However, I do blame them for believing that they can just join a group of thousands of people, like we're looking at a tribe from olden days that's tracking elk and following a herd of elk where it's going and in its migratory patterns. Like, I believe there are proper channels to, 1, apply for asylum, 2, get into a country legally and become a citizen, and 3, become a productive and assimilated member of that country. That doesn't mean giving up your heritage, that doesn't mean forgetting your history, but that does mean, and this is something that I have such an issue with in Canada, that there's a lack of assimilation with cultures, that it's like we're creating a mini European Union in Canada.
Well, we don't have a culture, according to Trudeau. So he can just suck a dick.
You look at the EU, and people that say the EU is negative say that it is because it took these 28 distinctive, different cultures with their own histories, backgrounds, languages, everything, and put them in a group and said, okay, we're all going to be people in Europe, and that's that. That's what we're sharing. And there's no underpinning narrative, and it's something that Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, a lot of conservative thinkers of today are big proponents of. And it boggles me that people are so unwilling to do this, to assimilate, to come to a country and realize that we have joined a country of X million people, and we're now trying to force them to bend around a few that have come here. Like, if you're a family from Italy that's come to Canada for whatever reason, and you think, okay, now these Canadians have to deal with the fact that I'm going to set up my own little Italy in my house, in my area. I'm going to go to a little whatever. I'm going to go to Little Italy, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with having these distinctive cultural hubs. I think that's something that makes Canada unique, and I think it's important. However, I also think it's important to remember you're a Canadian. In the Canadian culture,
there are shared values.
There's an underpinning narrative of ideals and beliefs that underpin Canadian society. I mean, you can look at the Declaration of Human Rights and say that's one of our underpinning values, and it's fairly obvious. You can look at, our shared law, our system of law. You can look at...
the belief that our law should be separate from religion.
Yes. which is something that has, unfortunately, that idea has come under assault recently. However, that's a whole another video. We're going to get back to this whole caravan idea and give a bit of our own personal opinions on what should be done. I mean, you know, we'll scroll. Never mind. Okay, we'll scroll through and show a little, just slowly show a little bit of the rest of the history here. But I think the point we're trying to make by showing this history and commenting on the tumultuous nature of it is the fact that, that's one of the reasons the people who are wary are wary. And I'm not going to say there aren't people who are just, oh, we don't want these people in our country. This is America for Americans. That's it. I'm sure there are.
We don't take kindly
to these folks around here. I'm sure there are people like that. There are evil, horrific people in all walks of life and every country in your own neighborhoods. It's just a fact. I grew up with the embodiment of evil myself. So it's just a fact, and it's unfortunate. But I also believe that if you can get beyond this idea that all these people that don't want the Hondurans in are just racists, and you can try to see their perspective, you're basically throwing, half the country what they want, what they're thinking. Let's even say it's 35-40% of the country. You're basically saying, fuck them. We don't care. It just doesn't matter. What we want is more important. We want the Hondurans to come in, and, I heard this term anchor baby, and I thought it was ankle baby.
No, who we heard it from was not pronouncing it very well.
He definitely made it sound like ankle baby, but anchor baby.
That wasn't just you, don't worry.
I think it was the 14th Amendment, and that's what covers it. That all people are equal under the law, and that all people, they can't be persecuted under the law, and the laws are applied to them equally, and that if someone is born in this country and born a naturalized American, that they're just American citizen. However, as much as I believe that was a good intention, and I believe that there is validity to that idea, I do not believe people should be able to come over illegally, pop a child. Like, you could be 8 months pregnant, come over illegally, somehow, make the journey, as dangerous as it is, pop your child out, boom, your child's a citizen, they can't get rid of you. It's just
somebody needs to look after the kid, so
end of story. No, that's
you have some sort of citizenship.
And I'm not saying that happens a lot. I am not. But I am saying that there are abuses in the system that I believe Trump has recognized Americans see as an issue, and he wants to correct that issue. That's my belief.
I will say this. I don't think he was right to try and stop everything.
In what regard? Stop everything? What is everything?
The bill or whatever that was stopped by the Supreme Court that would have just stopped migration or whatever it was that he was trying to do. Because again, I am a...
Are you talking about his Muslim ban?
No, it was specifically in regards to the caravan.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I showed it to you.
Yeah, but I thought it had to do with the Muslim ban when you showed it to me.
No, it was the caravan ban, and a migrant immigration ban he wanted to instate, and the Supreme Court shot it down. And I'm happy about that. I am actually happy about that because, again, these are human beings who don't have a place to go home to at the moment. And if they do, they could be killed.
And I don't agree with that. They do have a home to go home to. They left that home.
I'm not, but... Okay. Katz, you have to understand, it's the same thing as what we're talking about with the Afrikanas.
We haven't talked about that yet.
No, but we've mentioned that we were going to talk about it, but this is exactly the same thing. Yes, those farmers have homes to go home to. That doesn't mean they're not going to be killed. It's not to say that the government is not looking out for them. It's the exact same thing, but these people are white, And that's what makes it different in the terms of not getting any international recognition. These people are white. They were considered to be usurpers and oppressors. And you know what? For all we know, their ancestors were. For all we know, their ancestors were nasty people. But these are the descendants who had nothing to do with that. It's the same thing as slavery.
Yeah,
I had nothing to do with that.
That you can look at a white person and say you're white, therefore you're partially responsible for slavery. Well, am I going to look at somebody who's from Cambodia and say, you're Cambodian, so therefore you were part of the Khmer Rouge? That basically decimated the intellectual capacity of Cambodia for God knows how long. Cambodia was intellectually crippled from the Khmer Rouge and what they did with the Bataan Death Marches. But, of course I'm not going to do that, because that's not logical, that's not rational, unless you have people who say that. I do not believe they think there's a such thing as an objective truth or an objective fact. I believe that to them, this is the idea of the intersectionalism that we talked about in our first podcast, that things are subjective and that your reality is what you make of it. And if you imagine the idea that all white people are racist and all white people are responsible for slavery, I mean, I think that, when Kanye West said that black people are still slaves, obviously people have probably already interpreted this way, but he was obviously trying to say that they're enslaving themselves to the idea of racism
and victimhood
and this culture of victimhood. And, we have professional victims these days. I mean, we had Patrick Brown, who was the leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, by all accounts was going to smash Kathleen Wynne, who was the Liberal government for Ontario for over at least a decade, I believe. And
she's done a terrible job.
But by all accounts, he was going to smash her, and 3 months before the election, these accusations come out that, he was sexually inappropriate with high school girls. And then it comes out that these girls
couldn't give any description of the setting of where this had taken place. None of their descriptions matched any actual, schematics for these houses. Like, they were saying that he took them upstairs. There was no upstairs. He took them in the back room. There was no door on the back room, and it was right by the living room. So how could these things have even happened?
Well, and it came out that one of the girls lied about the fact that she was underage, and by all reports, he was ousted as leader because of the idea that they were underage. If they were above age, it would have just been okay.
We'll stick it out and see what the outcome is first.
Basically, this guy's just like a bit of a skeezy perv going after like 19-year-old girls at bars, and he's in his 40s. All right, I'm not going to say that's not creepy.
That's not illegal.
It's not illegal, and it's definitely not a basis to just try to destroy someone's political career.
Or just their character.
Well, in this case, thankfully, he became the mayor of a city in Ontario, Brampton, and that was just recently. So he's not done. The Reagan saying that it's not how hard you fall, but the fact that you get up again.
He didn't let it destroy him. He didn't let it destroy him. And I have always supported women and survivors of, I'm not going to say survivors, I'm not going to say victims, people who have experienced rape and sexual assault. I've always been
true victims of these things.
But that's my problem, is that there are people who have legitimate cases where they have been traumatized, terrorized, attacked. They've made feel vulnerable in their daily lives going forward. There's a psychological, physiological, there is an actual diagnosable or tangible result, consequence of it. And it is awful. That is awful. But when you falsely accuse somebody of sexual assault, you undermine every legitimate case.
Not only do you detract from the legitimate cases, but you just show that you're willing to go to any you're basically trying to do in a public setting to the person's reputation what you're claiming they did to you behind a closed door. You're trying to essentially rape them and
Publicly.
and shame them publicly instead of privately, so for everyone to see. And I guess my sexual assault is awful. I know people who were sexual assaulted. It's not saying in any case that it's okay. It's very obvious that it's wrong. It should never happen. People that do it should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But these cases should be dealt with in the courts, under the law, by a jury of our peers, where the person being accused is assumed innocent until proven guilty. There's a reason we have that principle in our society. And I would say to the people that turned back, going back to this caravan, that hopefully they had the mentality of it's not how hard you fall, but that you get back up again. And I hope that they're turning around with the mentality of maybe we can make a change. This didn't work out, so we're going to go back our country, see what we can do to make things better there. That's a very optimistic. It's very, very plausible that they were just like, shit, we're not getting in. It's going to take a long time. This isn't going anywhere. We've wasted our time. Time to go home. I'm sure that was, if not everyone, the vast majority of people probably had that idea. But even if one person went back with the mentality of trying to make a difference, they could be that person that makes a difference. People that shy away from responsibility will never be fantastic. You look at the idea of a superhero and superheroes in movies. We admire them because they're able not only to do things that are out of our control, but because they take on tasks that seem impossible and somehow overcome these impossible tasks. And that's one of the underpinning narratives of a superhero, or even you look at biblical stories, Jesus himself, the idea that he had the innumerable task of trying to take the sins away from humanity. But at the end of it all, he sacrificed himself and was able to do that. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons people admire Christianity, because of this idea of self-sacrifice that leads to a greater good. And I think
I'm not religious, though, so.
I mean, I'm not making an argument for religion. I'm just purely speculating. I have my own personal beliefs about religion. I personally am religious. However, I am not making a case for religion one way or another. If you are one religion or another, that's absolutely unequivocally your decision and not mine, and I do not wish to push my ideas on yours. I'm simply stating that, like a superhero, the Christ-like figures or messianic figures of religions are admirable because of the idea of self-sacrifice or overcoming obstacles so great that, it wasn't possible, but they proved that wrong. And I think that's part of the reason we have this fascination. I mean, look at Harry Potter. Jordan Peterson has, Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist, has a bunch of videos about not only Disney movies, but he also talked with Joe Rogan about Harry Potter and how the Harry Potter underpinning narrative of good battling evil, Harry being good, his friends rallying behind him, and him being that messianic, Christ-like figure that, sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the last movie or read the books.
Which by now, what the fuck are you doing with your life?
But he sacrificed himself. He himself was the last Horcrux of Lord Voldemort, and through his sacrifice, through him being quote-unquote killed by Voldemort, it destroyed Voldemort. And I'm not sure how he came back.
Well, you haven't read the books. You're just a heathen who's only seen the movies.
I've read 4 of the books, I just want to say that, but 5 to 7 I didn't read. I wasn't a Harry Potter fan as a child. I really liked the movies. movies, but not the books. I was a fantasy reader in terms of R.A. Salvatore. D&D setting fantasy books were more my fascination with reading. And manga, anime stuff, obviously. That's all very interesting. My goodness. Finime's being a goof. Sorry. It's late.
I'm tired. I apologize.
But no, I think I think I'm gonna get to I think we should get to our personal opinions on the matter now. In terms of the caravan, I think that there are legitimate cases and illegitimate cases, and unfortunately, like anything in life, you're gonna have to weed through the shit, and you're gonna have to find the truth. The truth being the cases that are real, the cases that are actual asylum seekers who, for some reason or another, are fleeing danger. I mean, we haven't talked about it much, but this Afrikaner thing, apparently, according to RT, quite a few of them have made, it's like 100 families have decided to go to southern Russia.
1,500, or 15,000.
No, 15,000 plan to go.
Fair enough.
But, so it was only like 100 so far that have actually made the journey. However, my point is that I watched an interview, and it was like Russian Insight or something like that. I have no clue, no idea. But Afrikaners, so the white South Africans of Dutch descent who went to Russia, were immediately trying to speak the Russian language, were immediately saying how each family was willing to bring $100,000 over as like an investment. There's apparently a program in Russia that's giving away free farmland because apparently they have like 465 hectares of unused farmland. I don't know, some
ridiculous
amount
number
of unused farmland that they're trying to get used. So,
and the hilarious thing is that the immediate reaction from the Russian people was to greet each of these families at literally as they walked off the plane
with a bundle of grain and fresh baked bread.
And we're welcoming them. And again, within a matter of days or weeks, I'm not sure, but the one main activist who was really trying to share how thankful these people were was, again,
father of one of the families, obviously,
failing miserably, but trying his earnest to speak Russian. And he called the land God's gift, and that it was beautiful. And
I mean, just, we'll get past, from what I've been looking into, at least, apparently Afrikaners are quite religious.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
They're from Dutch descent. It doesn't surprise me. I grew up my mother was Dutch, unfortunately. I only say unfortunately because she was insane. But the Dutch portion, I went to a private Christian school, and the vast majority, I would say, everyone was white. That's just off the bat. Everyone was white there. There may have been like 2 Asians, but I believe they were adopted by a white family. Of course.
So, I don't know if that counts.
They were all Dutch Christian farming people.
Huge families.
Oh, just ginormous families. The Dutch would just pump kids out like there's no tomorrow. But I guess the point of bringing it up is, what was my point of bringing it up? I'm tired. I don't know either.
Well, in terms of, because again, relaying back to what we were talking about with it being comparable to descendants not being able to be blamed for slavery. So what happened, what the government was trying to do is take land that was redistributed, and this is what I was reading, was that they wanted to redistribute land by 2014. And by that point, they had only done...
They wanted to redistribute like 30% of the land.
That had been taken.
And at that point, it was like 10%.
10%.
But this new government is essentially saying that they will reappropriate people's land and not compensate them for it. So they're going to steal their land, flip them the big middle finger, give them the bird, and off they go.
And again,
they're taking, the South African government, by the reports I've been reading, are just taking the piss out of these farmers who are the main backbone of the agricultural community in South Africa. Am I trying to argue that there haven't been...
that the apartheid was good? No.
Nobody
is fucking saying that. That would be absolutely ridiculous.
Am I trying to say that there haven't been injustices? Absolutely not. But I do think that if Nelson Mandela, he's not alive anymore. If he was around, I earnestly believe he would look, if this is true, he would look at the situation with these Afrikaner farmers and be disgusted and say, "What the heck are you doing? You're doing exactly what they did to us."
Well, let's give some context, because again, people are going to say, "Well, they took their land. Of course, they're going to try and take it back." But how they're doing it is what the problem is. There are hundreds and hundreds of attacks on farmer families where people are regularly murdered, raped in front of their family members, or tortured to death, or there's just been, quote, assaults. So the assault numbers are in the hundreds. I think it was over 50 at least by the African government
apparently
reports.
2 farmers were murdered a week. That was apparently
But this was and that was according to the gentleman who had written the book. I believe his name is Ernst Rothes. So you can take a look for that online. He was the one who wrote that book that we were talking about earlier. But again, it's the matter in which it's being dealt with, and the fact that when this gentleman was saying that when these white South Africans were seeking asylum in the States, only about 7% were accepted. And these are not people who are unable to contribute to society. Again, these people going to Russia have at least $100,000 to contribute. Like, they plan on actually being active, contributing members of society, and it's contributing to a huge boom in Russia's agricultural sector.
Well, I'd also like to say, I'm not taking a stance one way or another on the fact in terms of how the land was being redistributed prior to this. I'm not an expert on South Africa. Don't pretend to be. I know very general stuff that I was taught, and that general knowledge I've picked up throughout life. However, that does not mean I will condone stealing on a mass scale where the government is basically saying, "We're going to steal your shit, fuck you." Of course, people are going to believe that it's okay to do what you want to these people, especially if they think they're leaving. And I mean, what I said to Katz earlier, what I said to Finn and me earlier, was how long until this situation deteriorates into the next Rwanda? I mean...
Well, that's not even the concern. The concern is that they're going to end up like Zimbabwe, which is exactly the same thing that happened, where they forced all the farmers off their land and reclaimed them. But as you mentioned earlier, what happens when you have people who take over land but they don't understand farming? What happens where you have right now a drought occurring in South Africa and you don't understand the principles of irrigation? So what happens in Zimbabwe, and what is concerned here, is that your whole agricultural sector breaks down, your economy breaks down, and then you're just a giant shithole, and there's no way out. So...
I mean, South Africa is basically, at least from what I've been led to believe, it's seen on the international stage as the jewel of Africa, as what Africa could become, essentially. And arguably, I don't know if that's correct, if that assertion is correct, both in terms of if people actually see it that way, and if they did see it that way, I don't necessarily agree, because that would assume that it was because of the Dutch rule that led, just in the 1600s, when it was, when all of Africa was divided up by these international world powers and basically used as colonies for whatever they wanted, it would assume that it was because of this that led South Africa to be great. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I don't know enough to say that. I am saying, though, you look at what happened in the Soviet Union. Something very, very similar happened, where they went after the
Cossacks.
And these, which were the basically productive and useful farmers, and
they forced them to give up all of their grain and send it to the cities.
And killed them all.
Well, no. When the people who gave up all their food had nothing to give to their families and went through and picked them through the fields...
They'd be thrown in jail for it.
No, they would be killed for it, because any extra grain had to go to the city as well. You were not allowed to take that for yourself. So, it's the same situation that you have with any Marxist idea conceptually. When you apply any of that principles to that, where we own this, it's a you against me, instead of we need to work together to figure something out so that we can be happy, all of us. It's a we versus you mentality, and we deserve this. But it's not going to end well. But my problem is the fact that there's been large-scale violence and almost zero international recognition. Like nothing. There's been no international recognition, and I don't want to say it, but I think we all know for a fact it's because they're white. And again, looking at the history of how they acquired that land, even though it's generationally, even though it's through the families, it wasn't them who walked in and said, hey, this is ours now. But again, you have to consider people's attachment to places too.
Tucker Carlson did an interview with Ben Shapiro, where this podcast is almost done because I'm exhausted. But Tucker Carlson did an interview with Ben Shapiro, and he said that, I'm not an intellectual, I am an observer, and I make observations, and I'm more diagnostic than I am solution, because I'm not a policymaker, I'm an observer. And from observing the situation that's going on, I mean, every person, it should be both equal under the law, and the law should apply to them equally. Meaning that no person is better than anyone else, according to the government, and that every law applies to the same person, regardless of anything. And no one should be punished for their qualities, their unchangeable qualities: height, hair color, eye color, skin color,
disability,
what their parents did. And what their parents did, I think, is often thrown away. I mean, look at Germany. You have a generation of people who were racked and crippled by the idea of guilt because of the Holocaust. Am I saying they shouldn't have felt guilty? Of course not. Holocaust was awful, should never have happened. The amount of Jewish people that were murdered, gypsies, gays, disabled, blacks.
But German guilt is real.
The idea...
It's so real.
And it's crippling. It's crippling. It's made them this, where they're so afraid. They're so afraid to be industrious. The German industrial machine, not the military machine, but the industrial machine, what Germany is known for. I mean, there's a reason Germany, their auto sector is so big. It's because Germans are very hands-on, they're very intelligent, and they are very orderly and industrious, and they get things done. And German guilt hampered their ability to be what I believe they could be. I mean, they're right now almost a laughingstock because of Angela Merkel and her policies. But
that whole fucking European bloc of leaders is just a nightmare mess, though. I mean, we'll end on this in a minute, but it's been such a disaster zone. And again, that's where it becomes an issue of it's a human life. It's human life, and I think it's very ironic that Trump is trying to shut down the borders completely instead of looking and prioritizing and saying, okay, there's X amount of people here. This is the amount that we can process a day. We need to process and look at who needs to come in the most, who's the highest priority here.
You can definitely make an argument with what I've just highlighted there.
But
look how willing he is to apparently look into, and I'm not saying he shouldn't be, but look into and try to help the white Afrikaners who are apparently about to be discriminated against.
Okay, Rudy Huxtable. I wasn't finished my point. Finish your point so I can say what I was going to say and we can go.
Discriminated against on a governmental scale. I don't think that's happening to the Honduran people. However, I do think it's somewhat curious that his willingness to investigate this versus his willingness to try to see the points of the Honduran, I don't know if the Honduran Caravan, I don't know if I want to call them migrants, I don't know if I want to call them immigrants. I think time will tell what happens, obviously.
Now to finish my point, I think it's ironic that he is not doing where he's prioritizing and looking at, okay, we can profile and get people processed X amount number a day. Fine, let's do that. We'll just figure it out from here. I find it real ironic that the U.S. is doing that and Russia, the country, everybody villainizes and is this evil monster, and they're the ones who are welcoming these immigrants with open arms and saying, heck yeah, we'd love to have you here. We'd love to have the support in our agricultural sector because we know that you guys can contribute really well and effectively to that. Instead of making use of their actual talents and abilities, we're just saying, this is a terrible idea. No. Well, the States is. And again, it's just a interesting anecdote considering the public opinion on Russia. I thought it was very good of them to be
willing,
accepting.
Their openness to accept the Afrikaners. However, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for sticking it out.
I think next time for our next podcast, I would possibly like to talk about Theresa May and what's going on in Britain and the deal she apparently made with the European Union. That I listen to a lot of Nigel Farage, Brexiteer from Britain. Wonderful, wonderful man in my opinion. And he apparently said that Britain would stay part of the EU until like 2028 or something, some crazy nonsense. I'm going to have more specifics and more insight and everything else into that, but I believe that I would like to do that as part of the next podcast, is focus on the downfall of Theresa May.
And what a thing to end on. Well, again, thank you very much, and I guess we'll talk to you next time.
Goodbye.